March 12th, 2024, I pulled out approximately 40 cloves of garlic that had been sitting for the past 10 weeks in some damp soil in a plastic bag in the very bottom drawer of my fridge. I'd missed the opportunity to plant garlic in the garden in the fall and was now attempting to trick nature by giving garlic the vernalization that it needs in the coldness of my fridge. Depending on who you ask, garlic needs approximately 6 to 12 weeks of cold period in the ground to produce harvestable bulbs. So it's advised that you just treat garlic as a spring bulb that you plant in the fall. But winters here are very mild and our ground doesn't freeze. And despite the mild winters, it still does get cold enough to provide the cold period from those bulbs. But because I was putting them in the ground so late, I wanted to be sure that they got consistent amount of cold temperatures. And so I went ahead and moistened some potting soil, enveloped the garlic cloves in it, closed the bag, and put it in my fridge until March 12, 2024, when I pulled those bulbs out of the fridge and planted them in the ground, hoping that they were properly fooled into thinking that they had been planted outside in the cold the whole time. Gardening is all about experimenting, isn't it? And this was my very first time experimenting with this process. But I figured that truly the worst that would happen is that I would get garlic leaves that I could put in salads, but secretly hoping for the best, garlic bulbs. What do you know? Approximately 3 months later, at the end of June, I harvested about 40 heads of perfectly plump garlic that I have used in sauces, mayonnaise, roast, and even tinctures. I just used the very last of the cloves just a week ago. This was my first of many successes in my 2024 garden. Hi everybody, welcome back to my garden. My name is Vanessa and I turned our yard into our own little happy place at home here in Zone 7B, Virginia. And I want to give you whatever tools I have to help you do the same. 3 weeks prior to my planting the garlic in the ground, I planted something else in the ground with which I would have first-time success after many years of trying. On February 17th, 2024, I brought out a flat of ranunculus that I had pre-sprouted in my house the 2 weeks before. I had attempted planting ranunculus in the past, but never had great success, and there were many reasons for this, one of which is that in the past, I had always planted ranunculus too late. For a long time, I went by the knowledge found in books that winters are too cold to plant without a greenhouse. As I mention often, the books are not wrong, just not location specific. Here, recently, I've decided to treat the late autumn through spring as just one long cool period. I try to plant things to experiment to see what I can get away with planting or even seeding in the winter. Having studied from my past mistakes of planting ranunculus too late, I decided to take one more go at it by planting them in the ground in February, knowing that I should be prepared to cover them on the coldest nights that we would have. This was a project that I took on with my favorite little helper. He bought the corms with me, and he helped me to sprout them. And so on that mid-February day, it was only right that we planted ranunculus corms as we began. Together. And together we checked on their progress every single day until harvest. 3 months later, we were harvesting handfuls of ranunculus at a time to use in bouquets and to share with friends. I couldn't believe it. Having had success at last, we decided to try one more experiment. We would leave the corms in place instead of pulling them up to see what would become of them. Once the weather cooled back down in fall, should they survive the heat of summer? Ranunculus hate the heat, and so in the heat of summer, the plant dies completely back to the ground, and the corms have a tendency to disintegrate as well if you don't dig them up and store them till it's time to plant them again. But we left ours in the ground in the raised beds to see what would become of them. Our theory was that they would grow back in the fall as the weather cooled down, thereby giving us another crop of blooms in the late fall. For a good while, it wasn't looking as if this might happen. But the other day, as I was weeding out wild arugula out of that very bed, I found some success. The corms were sprouting back again from the ground. This experiment is ongoing, of course, but as of right now, in mid-October, the corms are back. On the last day of March in 2024, while I was checking on the progress of the ranunculus corms, I also checked on the progress of something else. Broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower seedlings that I had planted 2 to 3 weeks before that. I had also decided to plant these brassicas a lot sooner than I had in the past. Often we have very short technical springs that quickly turn to summer long before it's technically summer. This is yet another reason that I treat winter as the earliest part of spring here. And this is the very reason that I planted the broccoli so early as well. To my surprise, or perhaps to my great excitement, they too did well. We harvested heads upon heads of cabbage, as well as endless florets of broccoli. We ate them while they were green, but we also ate them while they were in flower. Did you know this? We ate them raw and ate them sauteed with butter and that very garlic that I had harvested. Perhaps the most surprising thing about the broccoli this year is something that's opened my eyes to a whole new realm of possibility for my garden. When the weather finally got hot and the broccoli had become a flower more than it was a vegetable, I cut the broccoli back to leaving maybe 1 or 2 inches of stalk above the ground. I did this because I didn't want to pull out the roots and thereby disturbing the soil underneath. I'd already interspersed tomatoes and other summer crops around it, and I thought that if I pulled the big mature roots of the broccoli out, it would disturb the small baby roots of the summer crops, which is why I simply cut the broccoli way back and just left the roots to disintegrate or compost in place and return to soil. Interestingly enough, that is not what happened. Those little stalks sat there with teeny tiny leaves on them all summer long. At this point, I was too curious to do anything about it and thought that we would treat it as an experiment yet again to see what happened. What happened was this. As soon as the weather began to cool down, the broccoli plant sprung back up, leafed out, and started to produce broccoli florets all over again. Isn't that incredible? Did you know this? Has this ever happened to you? Gardening is so magnificent because there's always something to learn. I don't even know if this is something that could be replicated, though I will be trying my hand at it again next year. I just know that this year, by accident, I discovered some potential that I didn't know about before. It's possible that I wouldn't need to start a whole new crop of broccoli for fall from here on out, but simply stunt the growth of the spring crop of broccoli and thereby encouraging it to produce again in the fall. In some ways, the fall crop has been more and less vigorous than it was in spring. By this, I mean that it produced as many florets as it did in the spring, but they seem a lot more eager to turn to flower and go to seed than they did in the spring. It's a constant race to harvest the broccoli before it goes to seed. I imagine there's some science here to these biennial type plants desperately wanting to set seed to reproduce that I don't fully understand. But I do intend to make every effort to understand this from here on out. The garden is full of lessons and truly full of many adventures. And these 3 lessons are 3 for which I'm very glad, especially this year in a garden that's actually been full of woes. If you're interested in learning about what woes were in my garden this past year, I encourage you to watch this video where I laid out some of my worst enemies that I encountered this year in the garden and my plan for making the 2025 vegetable and cottage garden more prosperous than it was this year. See you there.